All right, welcome to part 2 of my wiring video. This step is going to involve sleeving the wiring harnesses with this Techflex braided sleeving and shrinking the ends, including labeling them and putting clear heat shrink over the labels. A little bit about this Techflex stuff. I've used Techflex for a long time, and they are very good products. I highly recommend them. But I also wanted to try out a Chinese version of the same sleeving. You can see a little bit different weave pattern here compared to the Techflex, where it's like a single strand weave versus 3-strand. I'll try and get better pictures of this, but I also have a hot knife for cutting the Techflex, so we can avoid that situation there. And these 2 heat shrink kits from ProWire. The first one is SCL, again Raychem SCL. It is a 3-to-1, but it's a semi-rigid heat shrink. So this stuff is a lot more solid than the ShrinkFlex products that I've used in the past. Also, here is Raychem RT375 clear heat shrink, and this will be used over the top of the yellow labels. This is a 2-to-1 single wall heat shrink. When I was bundling this harness together, I made a pretty rookie mistake and put the bulkhead connectors on the ends of these, even though they branch out of the harness backwards compared to the rest of the flow of the harness, which means I would not be able to get the sleeving over this without being able to pull this entire branch back through the sleeving. So I have depinned these and taped them up, so now I can sleeve them in the right direction. But that was a pretty time-consuming mistake, and yeah, certainly something to look out for. Off camera, I also prepared the other 2 harnesses outside of the bulkhead connectors. This first one is the intake harness, which has the injectors and throttle body circuits on it, throttle position switch and idle air control, as well as the map sensor. And this one is the rest of the engine harness, including crank and cam sensors, knock sensors, coils, and whatever else. I'm drawing a blank at the moment. I do have to add coil power and ground. The ground's at the back of the cylinder heads with these for the ignition coils. And I will be using this flange DTP connector for the alternator charge wire, the starter wire. Well, after triple checking to make sure I had all the wires where they belonged and everything routed the way I wanted it to, and as I said in the intro, depinning the bulkhead connectors, I now have the harness taped up, and these first couple of branches perfectly perfect, exactly where I want them. And now it's time to get the first few sections of braided sleeving on. And there's the first section shrunk down. It's really easy to get a little too much heat on this braided sleeving, and you have to pay real close attention to make sure to back off the heat as soon as you see it affecting this braided sleeving at all. It'll get a little glossier before it starts to actually deform, and that's kind of what I'm looking for, to make sure it doesn't get too much heat on it. So I've gone ahead and repinned the 2 bulkhead connectors off camera and started working on, or test fitted and started working on the next couple of branches. So now I've got this one taped, and this will wind up right here, will wind up over the top of the steering column. And I'm going to have 3 more branches here where the zip tie is. Finish the last couple of splices so that my steering wheel buttons each will have a sensor ground on the other side of the connector, and trimmed them to lengths for the connectors here. So I'm going to tape up these branches here and then sheath the next part of the harness. So one thing about this braided sleeving is it can expand. This is 1/2 inch sleeve, and it's a little more than 1/2 inch diameter on the bundle, but it will shrink up. This was cut at 27.5, and we lost about 3 inches of length. I think since I want all these cuts to be done with the hot knife, just so they don't fray, I think I'm going to step back up to 3/4 inch and plan on not having the sleeving expanded at all. It's supposed to be able to expand to like 150%. So a 1/2 inch should be able to go up to 3/4, but you certainly have to figure in how far it's going to shrink up lengthwise. Alright guys, sorry if this video is getting a little disjointed, but I've only had a couple minutes every day, 20-30 minutes to get something done. And I wanted to both keep getting stuff done on the car and keep filming it. So I, keep what little momentum I have. So I've done another test fit here because my mock-up harness wasn't left a little bit of confusion on where a couple of these branch points were. I really do wish I'd spent a little more time getting the mock-up harness to be absolutely perfect and where everything needs to go. Because every time you drag this harness in here, it just gives it another opportunity for it to snag on something and peel some of the braided sleeving, or the bare wires might get caught on something, and it just unnecessary potential for some damage to occur. So anyway, I put the harness in, routed it where it's going to be. Everything looks good so far, up to where the fuses are, back out to the dash bar, and the branches for the dash bar here. I'll come around the car. Again, these are the branches for the steering wheel buttons, the brake switch and ignition switch, and heading to the rear of the car. Those connectors will be somewhere in here along the A-pillar bar. And then against this steering column bracket here and through the firewall. I don't know how well that shows up, but that's where it exits the cabin. And then out through the engine bay. I 3D printed a flexible TPU grommet that I thought was going to be the right size, but as it turns out, it's a little bit snug once the wires have sheathing on it. So I'll get started on 3D printing another one, but I think this is going to work great. The wide flange at the back is it retains it really well. In the firewall, it took a lot of effort to get it back out of there once I popped it in. So hopefully it holds up to the heat. Hopefully it does the job, because it's hard to find the perfect grommet for whatever bundle of wires you happen to have. Next time I print it, I'll actually print a lip on here to grab the heat shrink, and I'll heat shrink the harness to the firewall so that it just so it's completely sealed up from the elements. But right now my goal is to finish routing this into the engine bay, and I'm going to Kapton tape all the rest of the branch points. A lot of them are already here. These are the line lock solenoid here, and this will be a connector for the gear position switch, so that'll just hang here for now. And this is the fuel pressure sender. And then I'm going to make the branches for the boost solenoids, which the connectors are right here. And then onto the fan and dome pressure sensors, and the rest of the way across the engine bay for a future radiator mounted water pump. And the last one is the intake air sensor, which will wind up, the charge pipe runs this way, so it'll wind up in here somewhere. Here's the other end of the bulkheads, mounted on one of my bulkhead plates. They're keyed on the back so that the bulkhead connector can't spin, so that you can tighten the nuts down without having to have a second set of hands inside the car. And then just in my little firewall plate that I welded up. I do have to add the flanged Deutsch DTP. That'll be right here underneath. That's going to handle the charge wire from the alternator going back to the battery, and the starter solenoid wire, as well as two other ones that I can't remember. I'll have to consult my chart. Anyway, I'm going to continue on getting the harness routed and branched, and then the last few branches should go pretty quick. But I just wanted to say that this is the exact reason why I feel like I should have spent more time getting the mock-up harness ready, so that I didn't have to drag the unprotected wires through the engine bay and try and get it bundled. Plus, working in the engine bay, it's just not as comfortable as doing it at the bench. So next time I will definitely be spending a lot more time getting that mock-up harness as perfect as possible. I'm getting set up to cut another chunk of this braided sleeving for the next branch of the harness, and I wanted to show this. It's sold as a rope cutter off Amazon for, like, if you're making, I guess, riggings for your boat or something like that. But it is literally a soldering gun with a special rope cutting attachment. So I don't know if this thing could be found cheaper if you just search for soldering gun and see if it comes with an attachment like this, but it is definitely the way to go for cutting this braided sleeving. And also, it doesn't fray. These frayed ends you get with just scissors are incredibly hard to work with. Now that the harness is completely sleeved, it's time to start terminating these connectors on it, which is going to be quite the process in itself because everything has to go in exactly the right order. So first off is the label, the heat shrink label, and the RT375 that'll be shrunk over it to protect it. Next is the Raychem SCL to sleeve the end of the braided sleeving against the wires, followed by a boot in this case. Some of them have boots, some of them don't. And the wire seals for these GT150 connectors, followed by the pins, and then by the connector body itself. I think now is a good time to take a break, and get back at this soon.